because they want to use it for teaching. So once we start talking, then oops. I can do this.
Yeah, I know.
That's a tight one.
It is.
Yes.
Must be a cheap one.
Yeah.
How's that?
So
I'll hang on to this.
yeah, oh, you hang on to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I'm
I'll
on the lead.
Yeah. So I can turn you off if you get too noisy.
That's good. I need that sometimes.
Well,
so
it's wonderful to welcome you,
Thank you.
back. And as I last remember, you were looking into doing a PhD in response to some of your work in the past and here.
yes.
Is that so?
Yeah, that's so. So I've started my PhD. I had to go back to Holland because the academic system has sort of collapsed here.
Yes.
But my PhD is on spiritual care in hospitals with the works of art, not being art therapy, but different ways of using art, and coming from spirituality, so coming from our inner sources. And that's what we'll be talking about today.
Great. Thank you. And then, Chris, you'll be following Sylvia with literature on the theme. What say we switch over about 12? Would that give you time? About 25 minutes?
Yeah, I said I'll stop a little bit sooner so we can
Yes.
so we've got time for us to talk together.
Yeah, great. Okay. So that's all fixed.
Yes.
Okay.
It's all
So
set.
over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So welcome everyone. It's great to see numbers, despite of COVID. And in a way that is what this talk this morning, my part will be about, and also Chris's sharing about poets. That no matter what happens in life, you keep on track and you keep going. And that's one of the things I love about the Benedictine rules. You know, what do you do when life gets hard? You just get up in the morning. A very deep wisdom. This talk is going to be about Etty Hillesum and her inner journey in one of the worst periods in the history of the past century. Hopefully a history that won't be repeated. But all these forces are with us on the planet today. So the source of the talk is this book. These are her journals, which she has written in not even 3 years. And this is the Dutch text. Oh yeah, by the way, I'm from Holland. So I was able to read them, which is good. So these, and it's very small print. So she's been just writing in her journal. That was her way through what happened, and I will take you on that journey. I have given you a few parts of her words translated in English. So there was a first print of her journals, which was not the full size of this one, but they started off with, let's say, about a third of this volume, because people weren't that interested in what she had to say. So it took until the 1980s, almost 90, before it's been published in the full corpus of her text. But it's great that someone has translated a very important part of it. We're here in the center of spirituality of the Anglican Cathedral in Perth, and I'm always amazed, like every human being, I'm a little bit nervous before I have to give a talk, because you always think like, oh, do I know enough, and what if? But then after the quiet time and the prayers, you get connected, and you think, oh yeah, no, this is just flows from one to the next to the next. So hopefully I'll be sharing things that do connect with what we've already heard this morning, and it's about our way to the heart. And that is what this, the core of spirituality. You've heard that 100 times, but it is living from the inside out and from your heart as a center. And Etty Hillesum has shared her journey with us through her writing. So, who was Etty Hillesum? She was born in the Netherlands in 1914, and she was killed in Auschwitz in 1943, just before she turned 29. And Etty was the daughter of 2 Jewish parents, but this is important for her journey. They were not very religious Jewish. They were more what you would call assimilated, cultural Jewish people. So she didn't have a lot of Jewish upbringing. There was no, they didn't attend to the Sabbath, or they didn't go to synagogue. So quite a secular life, which makes her journey even more amazing. As I said, she was born in 1914 in a province in Holland called Zeeland. Then she moved to Deventer, which is a very pretty old town on the river IJssel. And then she went from Deventer to Amsterdam to study law. And she studied Russian and literature. And she went to Leiden, also an old university town where our royalty goes and study. So that's a little bit of the setting. And then, of course, 1940, the Netherlands gets occupied by the Germans. And there she feels pushed more and more and more and more and more into corners. Now, when we were discussing the topic of the first talk, to set off the year, the beginning of the year, Bishop David said, go back to the women of the first century, and I said, can't we just talk about Etty Hillesum? And I'll tell you why. So she is from the last century, and her voice, I feel, resonates with our time, our current time. When I read her words translated in English last year, when we went into our first lockdown, I was sort of amazed with the synchronicity, because her life, of course, you can't compare, fascist Germany is not a virus, so there's no comparison in that. But the restrictions in life, that was sort of creepy, because she was a Jew. Her life was getting more and more bounded and restricted. So first they were not allowed to go to, let's say, the concert hall, and then they were not allowed to go into certain shops, and then they were not allowed to go to work, and then they were not allowed to be on the tram. Someone's phone is going here. Then they were not allowed to go on a tram, and they had to walk everywhere. Oh, it's the already.
Not yet.
We're talking about restrictions. Then they were not allowed to go on a trams, and then they had to walk everywhere. And then the deportation started, and then they were not allowed too much out of their houses. So it was just like, it creeps up on you. Now this journey of Etty Hillesum is, as I said, sort of resonating with our current times. And if I think about Amsterdam, where she lived the last nearly 3 years of her life, some weird things are happening there at the moment as well. You know, it's maybe some of you have been in Amsterdam. I know some have. Stephen has, Pauline has. Yeah. So this is Amsterdam in the Second World War, where all this was happening. We know Amsterdam from a very lively city, overrun with tourists, like I don't know how many millions a year, always buzzing, bubbly. At the moment, one of my dearest friends lives in the Beguine Square, which is a 15th century old housing complex for single religious women. So that's, I mean, we're talking historical ground and religious in a very specific way. We can't talk about that. And that was always overrun with tourists. At the moment, it's full of snow to start off with, something that we can hardly imagine, but it's the worst snow there's been in years and years and years, like half a meter at least. And there are no tourists. There is an evening curfew. You're not allowed to go out after 8. You're not allowed to visit each other. And at night there has been quite a few riots, you know, aggression. People say like, oh, telling the government you're acting like fascists. So, that, you know, imagine that. This is the time we're talking about. That was the time then. This is the time now. So what did Etty Hillesum do just to cope, just to stay alive, just to live in all of this? Like, you know, that's what we are asked to do as well. You know, you have to get up in the morning. There's no choice really. She looked for help, and she went and found a therapist. He was a German Jewish refugee. So, but before the Nazis occupied Holland, some people thought, oh, that's going to be a safe place for us to be. So a lot of Jewish people fled to the Netherlands. Unfortunately, it was not a safe place. So he's a German Jewish refugee. He's a Jungian therapist. Imagine this is the 40s. So it's not long after psychoanalysis became into fashion. He was a palm reader. Also, he was very religious. Now, she goes sparring with him in a very intimate way. Eventually, she ends up being his lover. She had no problems with being lovers of not only one, but multiple men. That's her spirit, without condoning it. That's who she was. So with this guy, she gets this really intimate relationship. Just before he's going to be deported to the transition camp of Westerbork, after which the trains go into Auschwitz and all the other extermination camps, he dies. So he just escaped another death. But he's of a very, very, very big influence, because he helps her of being an extroverted, out there looking woman, very passionate. You know, you could see her mother's Russian spirit in her, all the cliches. Very passionate, and she just wants to learn. She's intelligent, loves to be with people, and he gets her to go inwards. And he tells her to go and sit, and write your journal. And that's what she did with this as a result. And in that journal, she looked within. And while she was doing that, and that's the importance for us, to look within, turn inwards. While she was doing that, not only did she become a little bit more peaceful, but in reflecting and to stay there, to stay in the inside, in her heart, she met God. And this is fascinating for me, because we're talking a young, passionate woman, not religious, no church, no synagogue, nothing, but just by doing what she's doing, she comes in this space where she meets God. And from there on, she starts reading. She reads always, but she turns to Augustine, you know, the Confessions, which is a spiritual autobiography, like this one is. And she relates to Augustine openly. She reads Meister Eckhart, an old mystic, a Dominican. She reads Rilke. It's very important, a German poet, Rainer Maria Rilke, which is a huge influence on her. That's one of her sources. So we're talking sources. And you know, all through the journal she says, "Oh, you know, if only I can take Rilke with me to wherever my life takes me," and she does. She does. That's always. She always goes back to his soul poetry. He's, you know, a very deep poet. And she turns to the New Testament. She reads bits and pieces of the Gospels and takes it on board. You know, like, oh, that's another voice. That's another voice talking to me. This German Jewish refugee, his name is Julius Speer. He has a group of followers around him, mostly women, and some of them are Christian religious. And she listens to them, she talks to them. So there's a whole lot of different influences that form her spiritual path. And she just listens, and she takes it on board, and then she goes to her room, sits at her desk, writes it all down. At some point it's a bit, you know, obnoxious that you have to see everything that's happening in her soul life and her sex life and her, all her bodies and aches and but it's true to life. It's the things that we're all wondering and struggling with, and slowly but gradually you can see the transformation, that she's no longer only occupied with her own little things in life and the people she meets, but and she's quite, you could say, like everyone who's in love, quite obsessed with this Julius Speer. But at some point, so her heart goes that way, and then at some point it goes out, it opens up, and embraces people around her. So her friends, but not only her friends, but also German soldiers, which is quite amazing. And it opens up to the extent that she takes up, knowingly, she takes up what she calls the fate of my people. And the fate of her people is to be taken away, to be killed. And there have been opportunities for her to try and escape, but she chose not to, which is quite big, you know. Coming from Holland, we all have had that question: what would you do? Would you run risks? Would you help people? Because a lot of Jewish people went into hiding, so we've got quite a few heroes, and other people who pretend to have been heroes, but we can't condemn them, because, you know, it's quite a thing to know you'll be killed. And she did it. So she volunteered. This is the big transformation. She volunteered to go into Westerbork, and Westerbork was not a concentration camp, but it's a transition camp where all the Jewish people were brought to from Holland, and from there the long trains went in a very scheduled way, and they knew they were going to Poland, and they knew they would not be coming back. So she goes to that camp to help people, and there are witnesses who say, like, we know from her journal she was a troubled soul, always, you know, worrying and thinking, but through those 2.5, 3 years you can see the transformation, and people who did survive describe her as a very lively, bubbly, helping, caring person. That's what she did. And there are diaries and letters who witness her presence there. So at the end, what she says is what she wants to be the thinking heart of the barracks. So the thinking heart, and that's that connection, that is spirituality. You know, the thinking heart, it's with her whole being, she wanted to be the thinking heart of the barracks and to be open to everyone and include. So this is this love with a capital that transcends all our own, little needs, and this is not the story of a sacred person who didn't worry. She did. She knew it, and she suffered, but she did it anyway. That's the grandness of this 28-year-old girl who also realized that her mood swings were caused because she was having her periods. We don't read that in the sacred lives of the saints. They never talk about having periods and being moody and get out of my sight kind of. So this is a true human being in the worst of times. And this is why I wanted to share this story today, because this is what it means to be fully human. And we are all very much trial. I mean, we live in paradise here. We sit here with our masks. But my family in Holland, I mean, this lockdown has been there since last year, September. And I hear my brother, he's got a family with kids. They're all in 5 people in one house. It's winter, no social life, and it's been going on for months and months. You know it from people way in England. How do you survive? How do you stay whole? How do you not break? And we hear stories about people committing suicide in lockdown. Marriages breaking up. Parents losing their patience and being abusive. Human, also human. But what do we do? What do? We turn inwards. And I love that with the prayer, what you had, and also with the Eucharist, and the sermon. What do? You go inwards. Our spiritual director asked me yesterday, what is your transition camp? What is your Westerbork? Just where you are right now, when you're pushed back into, there's no escape. What do you do? This Etty's story is a fantastic story and intriguing and fascinating because she's so strong and so fragile at the same time. But of course she's not the only one on this journey. We've had many examples or people who live in this way, and not only in Christianity but also in the humanist tradition. So we know the Michel de Montaigne, Mark of the Mountain, who wrote his Pensées, his reflective thoughts. That was in 1500 something. We know that's very current Zen practice. It's all about here being in the moment and live with what there is, including the hardship. And we're all old enough to know how hard life can be, and what you do when you lose your freedom, or you lose your health, or you lose your partner, or you lose your job, or in divorce. We all know that. So this young girl, and then I'm going to read something that you have in front of you. This young woman goes into her room, she sits down, writes, and then she meets God. Fascinating what she discovers. And again, no church, no synagogue, no upbringing. And this is what she has to tell us about what she meets. And I'm just slowly going to read it to you and just pick up some words, you know. It's all about just something coming to your heart and soul. That's all that I can hope for today. Something resonates with you. Tuesday evening. There's a really deep well inside me, and in it dwells God. Sometimes I'm there too, but more often stones and grit block the well, and God is buried beneath. And then he must be dug out again. I imagine that there are people who pray with their eyes turned heavenward. They seek God outside themselves, and there are those who bow their head and bury it in their hands. I think that these seek God inside. On Thursday morning, fool that you are, you try to draw yourself life-size in words and colourful sweeping words, but no words will ever be able to contain all of you. God's world and God's heaven are so wide. Back into darkness, into your mother's womb, into the collective. Break free, find your own voice, vanquish the chaos within. I am pulled to and fro between these two poles. We must only speak about the ultimate and most serious things in life when the words well up inside us as simply and as naturally as water from a spring. And if God does not help me to go on, then I shall have to help God. The surface of the earth is gradually turning into one great prison camp, and soon there will be nobody left outside. The Jews here are telling each other lovely stories. They say that the Germans are burying us alive or exterminating us with gas. But what's the point of repeating such things, even if they should be true? I don't fool myself about the real state of affairs, and even drop the pretense that I'm out to help others. I shall merely try to help God as best as I can, and if I succeed in doing that, then I shall be of use to others as well. But I mustn't have heroic illusions about that either. Sunday morning prayer. Dear God, these are anxious times. Tonight, for the first time, I lay in the dark with burning eyes, as scene after scene of human suffering passed before me. I shall promise you one thing, God, just one very small thing. I shall never burden my today with cares about my tomorrow, although that takes some practice. Each day is sufficient unto itself. I shall try to help you, God, to stop my strength ebbing away, though I cannot vouch for it in advance. But one thing is becoming increasingly clear to me, that you cannot help us, that we must help you to help ourselves. And that's all we can manage these days, and also all that really matters, that we safeguard that little piece of you, God, in ourselves, and perhaps in others as well. Alas, there doesn't seem to be much you yourself can do about our circumstances, about our lives. Neither do I hold you responsible. You cannot help us, but we must help you and defend your dwelling place inside us to the last. I'm going to stop here for a bit because of time. Because I want to, hopefully we can have a talk about this specific relationship with God she has, because, I've never heard that before. Someone talking in these words, that she has to help God. But then I want to do a bit of theology quickly, if I can find my papers. This always happens for some reason. Doesn't matter. So she has this specific relationship with God that she says, I don't hold you responsible. She doesn't ask, where are you? Because God is here. That's her experience. God is here. And not only God is here, but she has to look after God. By looking after herself, she's looking after God. So this is the most intimate relationship you can have. It is as if God is with God, You sort of get the picture. It's hard to put that into words. That's an experience. So her experience is that she's in the hands of God. And she describes that in those terms. She's in the hands of God. And she's in the womb. And she can lay with God. We know these passages from the Bible where you lay with God. This is when she's in Westerbork. She just lays at the feet of God and feels safe. Now, what she does is she takes up the cross. So this is a little bit of theology. She takes up the cross and does what our Gospels tell us to do. That is metanoia, conversion. You have to change your ways radically. There's no in between. And that is the gospel, that is the good news, and that is the kingdom of God. It's a radical turning around, and she did it by turning inwards, turning out, and changed radically, and taken up the cross. Now, the tricky thing is that we can't put our Christian theology on that. That you can understand that is historically also, but also within interreligious dialogue, very how would I say it? Very delicate. We're on very delicate ground here, because she did take up the cross. She does converse, and she also says, yeah, Christianity. She says it. Christianity, yeah, why not? So she's not against it or anything, but we must not put our theology on it, and keep with her in her journey. So a Jewish feminist theologian, Melissa Raphael, she did that. She looked at memoirs and biographies and diaries of Jewish women in the camps. And what she saw was that these women in the camps looked after each other and after other people. Now, she uses the Jewish, it's a sort of an image of God in the Old Testament, and that's called the Shekhinah. And the Shekhinah is the living God on earth. And it's a female God. So this is a God at least with female qualities. And the Shekhinah, she puts up a tent on earth. Can you imagine? We're talking concentration camps. We're talking the presence of God. So what Etty Hillesum lives for us, and what she gives us, is this image of her not only surviving but thriving, and knowing that she is in the presence of God, and that God is present where she is, in the worst of all, and as a tent. Now, no offense, but we're not talking cathedrals. We're not talking organized religion. We're talking the presence of God. Shekhinah. And that's her conversion. In the end, you look after yourself, you look after God inside of you. Don't go looking out there, in here, and take care of that most intimate. She writes, it's more intimate than your sex life. And this is her gift, I feel, for us. You know, this very delicate presence of God, no matter where we are. I have, so there's some more abstracts about her relationship with God. You can read that at home. And I've had some questions coming up, which you are happy to look at when you're at home and just think about it. Because this is why I wanted to talk about Etty Hillesum. She was preparing for a future, and we never know what will happen. And the way to survive and even thrive and converse, metanoia, is by looking inward. So this is not a lesson from the past, this is for us today. Thank you.
Would you like to